A very good morning to you all, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, good morning. Yes,
I think we can start. I have given you co-host rights, many of you, because I want you to help me and manage the session in the unlikely event that we get microphones and videos that actually misbehave. And this is very, very common. So you don't have to wait for another person. As long as you have the co-host rights, please go straight to that person and mute, right, that individual, because you have the right to do so. Right, I know this is a very busy season, and many of you have so many things that you are doing, meaning that it is a little bit hard and hectic, right, to reconcile some of the activities that you are actually undertaking, right? So today's session, we again, right? I think there's someone who is giving you comments there. I don't know, right? But I think he wants you to respond. Okay, that's fine. Right. Now, today's session, we continue with what we had earlier discussed, right? I know my friend, I think Cody had a question, maybe it is related to his work about geology. Cody, I think we may have to organize a separate session for us to discuss. I saw your things are very, very interesting, right? The only challenge I had was to try and comprehend, because I saw you are talking about countries that are probably far from ours here, right? So the context wasn't very clear, right? But I saw you have very interesting ideas about geological perspectives. And for some of you have been wondering as to whether theories exist in the natural sciences. I think I deliberately searched for you and picked a few theories that I posted on the Makerere University announcement, Directorate of Graduate Training website, so not actually WhatsApp group. So you can go and pick those theories. In medicine, they are there. Fisheries, they are there. I sent you a few. There's a gentleman who was claiming that in the fisheries section, you don't have theories, right? And I specifically picked a few that we are talking about parasites in the hatcheries unit, meaning that actually theories exist, right, that explain the kinds of phenomenon or that you want to investigate. So do not be deceived that there's any field. I also try to find out by looking at those leading journals in the various fields, nursing, medicine, and plus other areas. And I discovered that all those fellows are saying that the development of theory or theories and the testing of the existing theories is a major scientific contribution in the natural sciences. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, you need to be aware of that. Although we may have been taught, I know many of us still have the undergraduate excess baggage, whereas we still think that these things are not possible. I want to assure you that they are very, very possible. And even the gentleman who was talking about geological formations, I can assure you the number of theories there. You may not have seen them. I have seen them personally. And that's why we need to have a separate discussion after this. But if your supervisor or doctoral committee does not want these things, please do not add them there. Your college does not espouse these things, do not really bother very much. But I can assure you the development of science, according to Karl Popper, is still it centers around this particular element of theory. Right. Now, having said that, today's discussion, as you're aware, is a continuation, right, of the discussion that we've been having over time. I'm actually trying to look for the share button so that I share the slides with you, and you're very familiar with these slides. And I'll be sending you the slides, but I've always told you, for me, I don't see value in the slides. And that's why I've bothered to send you books. In fact, for me, instead of sending you slides, I send you books, right? Because these books are very, 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 very important. So this is our first lecture. The other lecture I gave you last time was an introductory lecture, right? An introductory lecture to Karl Popper's conjectures and refutations, growth of scientific knowledge. But I also gave you the book, right? Meaning that you can actually read the book yourself and try to understand. Can someone help me mute Nantaja Donald so that the mic doesn't misbehave in this lecture? Right, so that is what we are discussing. And last time, if you recall, I gave you an introduction that took us through a number of things that I do not intend to go through this morning, right? I gave you the purpose of the session, the learning outcomes, the sort of philosophical method, right? All of those things, why why Popper matters, and I also gave you the scope of the book, right? But we stopped on the broader intellectual project, Karl Popper's project, right? And I think we stopped at a time when I had asked you that question, right? And that is the facilitation reflection that I wanted you to think about. Can a university become intellectually authoritarian, right? Is it possible? Maybe in your college, you can talk about college because the university has given you an opportunity to do things the way you want to do them, as long as you fit within a particular structure of the university. So you do not expect a thesis that is produced in the geology department to have more or less similar things that you will have by a thesis, a PhD thesis from the College of Medicine, right? Or maybe the one that comes from education or probably psychology. So there would be differences again, right? But of course, the structure is there, but you've been told that you can add a few things that you want to add, right, in your work. So today, we're actually beginning our lecture by just introducing you to the major chapters, right, in the book, Conjectures and Refutation, right? And one of the chapters you'll find there is Conjectures and Refutation, Science, Conjectures and Refutation, right? And to me, this chapter actually introduces very interesting things, and it anchors what we call Popper's central claim that science actually advances through criticism, right? And the elimination of error, right? And that's why during your free time, you need to read, right? So that you get those aspects right. The second chapter that you will find there is the nature, right, of philosophical problems and their roots in science. So there are many, many philosophical problems, and all these philosophical problems are rooted, right, in science. And they have their roots in science. And of course, as I've already said, Popper argues that philosophy should not become abstract speculation, right? Because in some areas, philosophy is just an abstract speculation which is detached from real science and the social problems, right? And of course, the also many other perspectives. Allow me to turn this into slideshow, right? And then you have another chapter that talks about views, or the three views concerning human knowledge, right? And that's where the book examines epistemological traditions. And those traditions concern things like certainty, things like empiricism, and also rational inquiry, right? And then, of course, there are other chapters there towards a rationale, or what you call a rational theory of tradition, right? And this one shows that actually traditions are necessary for knowledge growth, but must remain open to criticism. I'm sure last week when you are closing, or this week actually, when you are closing your training at Makerere University, you must have been introduced to the traditions, right, methodology, the opposing traditions. For example, the quantitative tradition and the qualitative tradition, right? I remember facilitating some aspects there, but I did not go into the discussions of the traditions because my concern then was really the quantitative bit, right? For example, in the quantitative paradigm, right, how do we conceptualize, operationalize, and measure? And within the quantitative paradigm, right, how do we, for example, incorporate theory in our work? How does theory drive everything we do, right, in quantitative studies? And I hope you did enjoy that. If you didn't, then maybe you can have a discussion during your groups, right, so that you learn more ideas in that area. Right, so a rational theory of tradition was, is discussed by Karl Popper, and Karl Popper takes you back to the pre-Socratic age, right? And there is a whole chapter dedicated to that, where Karl Popper demonstrates that early philosophers, early thinkers, right, established traditions of bold theorizing and critical debate, and we must not really depart from that. And I think even last time when we had the lecture here, I talked about the Socratic questioning approach, right? And that is very important. Socratic, you should always interrogate, right? Everything that comes your way, don't take it for granted, right? And you'll discover that we've got multiple interpretations. Yesterday, I was actually reading a post online where they were discussing this lady, the Speaker of Parliament. And I saw two people giving their views. One was Ofono Pondo, and I don't know whether it was Ofono Pondo. Was that no. I think it was this gentleman who writes a lot about Andrew Mwenda, right? Andrew Mwenda, and so a debate between Andrew Mwenda and the CDF, right? The views of the CDF and the views of Andrew Mwenda. And actually, when I read, right, the views that I saw there, I saw a philosophical debate emerging, right? Because for him, as Mwenda, he looks at this from a kind of system that has developed since 1980s, that is 86. Actually, even talks about the Bush war period, right? And what happened or transpired during the Bush war, and after the time when they took over government up to where we are today. And he was talking about networks and things like that. And his debate is quite interesting, right? Whereas the CDF's debate is about corruption and stamping out corruption, his view, it takes a totally different perspective. And I was actually amused by the way he was actually analyzing and looking at things. And to me, that was very good. And that's why I've always told you at the PhD level, do not simply accept things anyhow, right? So that's why now Karl Popper takes us back to the early philosophers, right? The pre-Socratic and the Socratic period. And that's why you must question, right, everything. And then, of course, you will find us another chapter on truth, rationality, and the growth of scientific knowledge. And of course, lastly, you go into prediction and prophecy in the sciences, right? By the way, many times when we use our quantitative methods to do some bit of predictions, right? And you say that these variables predict 50% or 30% of the construct or the criterion construct. Sometimes we forget that we actually become prophets at that point, right? You are prophetic because you are predicting what is likely to happen from the kind, but for you use past information that is available in literature and the evidence that you have, which is current, and then you predict and generalize. You generalize and then predict. You make predictions that this is what is happening out there. So prediction and prophecy, right, is one of the chapters that you'll find in that book. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's the last chapter in that book, if I'm not mistaken. If there are some books I've forgotten there, you will remind me about, because I can't remember everything that is presented, right, in that book, right? But certainly, we go ahead and try to understand what Karl Popper is putting before us, right? And I think this is important, and that's why now our first slide, right, now dealing with the central issues within the book, deals with the science and pseudoscience, right? Many of us have difficulties understanding this. And this is one of actually Popper's most famous contribution, right? Popper contributes to literature by distinguishing between science and pseudoscience, right? And actually, the central question that is raised at this point is, what makes a theory genuinely scientific, right? And that is very important, because you deal with theories, you deal with the philosophies, as we saw. But why do we believe, right, in these theories, right? Again, not believing in them blindly, right? Because we are called to question, right? To critique, right? So what makes that theory genuinely scientific, right? Now, of course, when you read the book very well, you discover that Popper, right, rejects the idea that science is distinguished merely by observation or data collection, right? Because there are those people who believe that the process becomes scientific and the theory developed becomes scientific because we are able to observe certain things, right? And even carry out experiments, right? And interpret what is happening, right? So as long as we go into data collection, right, that is it, right? But Popper, right, instead, he argues that science is distinguished by falsifiability. Remember conjectures and refutations. Refutations centers around falsifiability. To him, it's about the ability to develop those particular constructs that can actually be falsified. So according to Popper, a scientific theory must expose itself to possible refutation, right? And to him, that's what is science, right? Now, the implication here is that the theory, right, that you develop, or what scholars have developed over time, right, actually, that theory makes risky predictions, right? And that theory, right, actually prohibits certain outcomes. And that particular theory of yours can potentially fail, right, when confronted with evidence. Now, on the other hand, right, the thinking is that pseudo-scientific theories will actually behave differently. Those pseudo-scientific theories, right, they only explain everything after the fact, right? And of course, avoid genuine empirical task. What we are trying to say here is that when you come up with a theory, right, you are making predictions, right? Now, your theory to be scientific, those predictions are risky because we are going to subject your theory to rigorous testing. All right, and at the end of the day, we must be able to falsify it. We must be ready to falsify it, right? And of course, there are certain outcomes, and that's why I've always told you that after coming up with your conceptualization or conceptual framework, you must give us boundary conditions because your conceptual framework will not be accurately predicting the phenomenon in different settings, right? And of course, your theory, you must remember your conceptual model, your theory, right, that you're going to develop, assuming that you develop one, or the theories that have been developed over time, right, can potentially fail. There is no single theory that will be accurate, right, 100%. That theory may work, right, in America. It may not work in Africa. It may work in America and also work in Africa, but when you go to other communities, right, within a country like Uganda, that theory may actually fail to predict, right, the situation there. Because these fellows are totally different and they are living under different contextual situations, right? And I'm sure you know that very well. If you move from Kampala here, right, and go to one of the villages, right, in Kabela Maido, right, or somewhere in the Kashambia, right, that side of Chigezi and so forth, right, and you see the way people live and the circumstances and the situations they are going through, they are totally different. So you cannot bring a theory that was developed in an affluent society, right, that can explain a phenomenon in the US, in the UK, in Nairobi town, right, and maybe if you go to South Africa, right, it can explain something that's happening in Cape Town, right, but when you come here, you go to Kashambia, the theory may actually fail, and that's why these, right, you are making risky predictions, and those are what we call scientific theories, because a scientific theory must expose itself to possible refutations, right? So science, right, is certainly distinguished by falsifiability. Now, if your theory cannot explain things after everything has happened, after the fact, right, and it avoids genuine empirical risk, then that is not really a scientific theory, right? But you know very well that that will be a pseudo, right, a theory. And of course, that's why you'll find the Popper, right, Karl Popper, trying, especially in that section, if you read, Popper tries to contrast, right, Einstein's relativity theory with, for example, the Freudian psychoanalysis. You know Sigmund Freud, for many of you who have a psychology background, you know what I'm talking about. You know the Adlerian psychology, right? You also know the Marxist historicism, right? So he compares, and according to Popper, these systems often reinterpret everything, right? And not even everything, but I mean, these systems, right, that like the Marxist, the Freudian, and the rest of them, right, they will reinterpret every possible outcome, right, as confirmation. And that's why even in your areas, you're actually forced, right, after you've used the theory at some stage, your supervisors will force you to discuss results, and they'll tell you this one confirms, right, this. This is consistent with this kind of thing, right? So those are things that we are talking about. Let me just give you a practical example here, right? Supposing you are a scholar that is undertaking a study, right, in the area of leadership. Just a second, let me attend to this. Just a second, please, 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 please. Sorry for the interruption. I'll be with you in a second. Just a small thing here. Sorry. Yeah. I think, sorry, I'm back now. I had an interruption here, right? I hope I'll recall where. Okay, I was trying to give you an example, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Suppose you are a leadership scholar, right? And your job now is to carry out a study, right? And at the end of the day, right, you come up with a claim, right? So as a leadership scholar, you come up with a claim that every organizational outcome results from leadership style, right? So for you, what you see is that whatever happens within an organization is as a result of leadership style, right? Now, of course, this can be science, but can also be pseudoscience. Now, it becomes pseudoscientific if, right, success confirms the theory. In other words, because the organization is doing very well, it's about leadership style, right? But if there's also failure within the organization, you are talking about leadership style, right? Failure, right, is also confirming the theory, right? And then you discover that even contradictions that you experience, they are endlessly reinterpreted and taken back to leadership style, right? And you discover that there's no possible evidence that could disprove this kind of claim. So if that is what is happening, then that is pseudoscientific. A scientific theory must permit the possibility of failure, right? Let me just give you an example, right? Another example, right? Social media, right? Let's imagine that you are dealing with the social media misinformation, right? And you are doing research in that area, right? Now, for someone who has a weak mind, right? He may actually claim that people reject misinformation because they are irrational, right? So in other words, misinformation is rejected, right? Because of irrationality, right? Now, if we go ahead and begin analyzing the information that's available, and we discover that every possible behavioral outcome, right, is actually interpreted as evidence of irrationality, right? So the theory becomes difficult to falsify, right? So in other words, you need to be very, very, very careful, right? If you have a theory that everything that happens, people take it back to that theory and they say, well, the theory explains this. The theory explains it. In other words, the theory seems to explain everything, right? And that becomes pseudoscience. So ladies and gentlemen, maybe let me rest here for a second, right? And try to deal with this question, right, that is before us. Can your conceptual framework potentially fail? And what evidence would force you to revise your theory? Right. Incidentally, I'm using this, I'm turning your conceptual framework into a theory because if you do a good study, right, at this point, and later on your framework becomes very, very useful, I can assure you future scholars, first of all, they will begin referring to it as a framework, just like you have a term, the technology acceptance model. They'll call it a model and so forth. Like term now is very famous. There are so many other models that we see. But I can assure you term very soon, scholars will start calling it a theory, right? If they discover that it's very, very useful, it will be upgraded from a model to a theory. So in other words, let's use these two terms now interchangeably, and I can call your conceptual framework a theory, right? So do not fault me on this, right? So can we now reflect on this? And please feel free, you can unmute and speak. Can your conceptual framework potentially fail, and what evidence would force you to revise your theory? Right, who will go first?
Yes, Professor, I can go first. Utamongs Abdul.
Please.
When you look at my conceptual framework, I have a segment where I have to look at the effect of seasonality on parasite infestation in the hatcheries. When you look at literature, it is expected when you have in the dry season, the parasite infestation will be high for the monogenous parasites. In the wet season, they will be low. So you may create a theory of parasite-host interactions. However, you may find that the farm management practices or the biosecurity on the farm is high. And you realize that in the dry season, the farmers, there's no rain that is going to interrupt the biosecurity measures. Then in the wet season, when it's raining, the farmers don't carry out those farm management measures because it's rain. Rain is going to interrupt the normal farm schedule. So you realize that the assumptions that you had before, that you expect high parasite infestation in a dry season, you realize that it's low. The wet season, where you expect low infestation of the parasite, it is high. And realize that maybe it's because the rain season interrupted the daily operations of management of the farm that would calm down the parasites, and this brings the things to be in the opposite way. So in such a scenario, you may be forced to think of another theory that can also allow the assumption of an external a third factor other than seasonality. That the rains not only affect the parasite host relationship, but also affect the management of those parasites in the system. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, I'm very happy that now you have started thinking in the direction that you didn't have during the time when we met at Makerere, right? But you saw that some of the books I sent you, right, which have those theories. I hope you have looked at them.
Yes, I've downloaded them and secured them to read them in a great time.
Fantastic. And actually, from what you are saying, but the other thing is, you may not really look at that theory as failing in that area and therefore introducing another theory. You can think about boundary conditions, right, of a theory. And I think the boundary conditions are very important. So, but at least now I can see you have started thinking about those things, because those can actually come in as possible moderators, right, of the parasite infections. So I think for me that is very good, right? So we are getting there. At least Popper is informing the way we are doing things. Right, another person, please. Another person. Another person. Another individual, please. Just unmute and speak because you've already started working on your work, right? And remember last time I told you that the concept of, don't look at your conceptual framework only from a diagrammatic perspective, right? The conceptual theoretical framework can actually be mathematical, right? So we have mathematical frameworks and we've got diagrammatic, right? And these vary from discipline to discipline. The one from computing, right? And informatics will have something that is totally different from the other fellow who is coming from economics, or from another person that is coming from psychology. So we have different ways, and the other one from management science, right? Because of the functions of these models in our research area, right? So feel free and don't mind, just unmute and speak. Aleni, you want to talk to us? Aleni, Mary?
Yes, Prof.
Go ahead. Oh, that is
okay, thank.
Please.
Can I?
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Prof. Yeah, in my work, I am testing the theory of sustainable rural development. And it stipulates that when people implement some adaptation strategies, it contributes to improve their food security. So I am testing this theory in Chad. And then at the end of the day, if those vulnerable people implement actually the adaptation strategies, and the outcome actually they are, how do you call it, food security at household level is improved, I'm going to confirm it. In case they implement and then there is no improvement in their food security at household level, I will actually refine the theory. Yeah, this is my idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Another person, please unmute and speak.
Yeah, this is Michael. I have a mind. I'm testing the relationship between climate variability, that it is hypothesized that climate variability and anthropogenic activities affect the way aquaculture farmers use antimicrobials, and as a resultant outcome, it influences the emergence and spread of antimicrobial resistance. But I look at a situation where the extremes in the weather can heavily affect the framework, and also the nature of how farmers interact with the environment. So where the environment can change, it can affect how this framework is conceptualized, because previously we have conceptualized that changing environment and the activities of humans influence contamination in the lake and how farmers use antimicrobials, and as a resultant factor, the antimicrobial resistance will increase. But it may happen that maybe the flooding and the excessive weather extremes can instead lower the contamination and lessen the effect. So in such an instance, the concept can change. And as you said, we may have to draw the real boundaries before the concept can be proved. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, Professor, and ladies and gentlemen.
Morning.
My name is George. My topic is employee diversity and project performance. So when it comes to the conceptual framework, the mediators, which is affecting how the variables, the independent variable is affected, is the governance effectiveness, how the policies and the processes are taken through. So when it comes to the moderators, which is leadership, institutional context, and I'm dealing with the post-conflict setting of South Sudan. So you might have a lot of conflicts there when it comes to the investigation. So those might be some hindrances which will affect my work. And the evidence which would force you to revise your theory, I think it will have to be it will have to be in the moderators and the mediator variables, which will force me actually to rethink my theory, because it's structured around employee diversity and project performance, but those mediating factors and the moderators, that can shift the way I look at things, because it will cause me to readjust when it comes to like for instance, leadership style within the organization. Maybe the actual fact is the performance would have been better if there was a change of leadership style. Thank you.
Okay, Tombe, let me just make a comment here or two. If you attended
Yes.
my lecture last week, this week actually, must have been Thursday at Makerere, where I talked about the role of theory, right?
Actually, I missed that whole program. I've missed it.
And then ask for recording, right? Ask for recording.
Okay.
The reason why I think you need it is because one, you have a criterion value that I have had from you, employee diversity, I think, in project management. Then I see you're talking about sustainable rural development theory and a few others. Then I see you're talking about leadership styles. You're talking about other things, like governance.
No, those are the mediators and then the moderators.
That's what I'm referring to. Exactly, that's what I'm referring to. Those are constructs in your work, right? The theory should give you the constructs, right? But the moment you find a theory and the constructs are not related, you have issues. So I don't know, because that now takes us back a bit. But our argument here was really assuming that you've done conceptualization correctly, right? And everything is okay. Can you identify, right, situations and circumstances under which your conceptual framework will potentially fail, right? Without necessarily telling us your constructs, because now as to whether the theory speaks to the conceptual framework and vice versa, and how you're going to, You're going to triangulate those particular theories or integrate them, is a different story altogether. And I'm just assuming that at this level you have done it very well. Right. If you paid attention to the gentleman who was talking about infestations of parasites, right? And he was talking about the host, and that kind of relationship and what happens during rainy seasons and during. So he was actually introducing something else, right? Which may not be part of the theoretical, not of the theories that he's using, right? But may come in there to demonstrate that the parasite count may actually go up or go down depending on a few things here and there. Then those becomes actually moderators, right? In other words, they are able to strengthen, right, or weaken that kind of relationship that is trying to hypothesize, right? But anyway, I am very sure that all of us have experience here, and think about it. For me, I've told my students that after conceptualization, the ones I supervise, after conceptualization, I tell them to come up, right, with the assumptions, right, and a critique, right, of the conceptual framework. Now, if you do it yourself, right, at the time when you are conceptualizing, right, and coming up with the conceptual theoretical model, then it gives you time to anticipate the types of questions that people will raise during your viva, and then you have an answer, right, to them. Now, of course, just to respond to, giving a general framework from the answers that our colleagues have given us about this question here, whether your conceptual framework can potentially fail, I think the answer is yes. Because from a Popperian perspective, a strong conceptual framework must be capable of failure because scientific explanations, right, remain provisional and open to criticism. And that's what Karl Popper encourages us to do, right? And that's why you have boundary conditions. And even for you to begin crucifying the developers of theories, saying that this theory does not explain A, B, and C, is unfair because it was not developed actually to explain those particular things. So look at the conditions and situations and then critique it from that perspective. But if you want to use it elsewhere, yes, then do so, right? If it is a different setting, you say now you are adopting these ideas because you can actually see a seamless, right? And of course, genuine, right? Semblance, right, of the methodological setups and the theoretical perspectives and definitions and concepts, so that now you want to use it. I mean, the way we pick theories from natural sciences, like the other day I was talking about thermodynamics, and then the social scientist uses it and develops the what you call the complexity theory, right? Of course, right from thermodynamics to chaos theory, right? Very common that side of engineering and other areas of natural sciences. Then you can bring in this, bring it this way and develop your theory, right? So a framework that cannot fail, right, risks becoming dogmatic or what we call pseudoscientific. So conceptual frameworks should therefore be constructed in a way that will allow contradictory evidence, alternative explanations, or even the contextual variation and empirical testing, right? For example, if you propose a study, let's imagine you are in the area of finance and your study is digital financial inclusion, right? And you're simply saying that digital financial inclusion improves women's economic empowerment, right? In other words, if ladies are digitally, right, and financially included, then their economic empowerment is likely to go up. Now, the framework may fail, right, in this situation if evidence reveals other things, like, for example, increased indebtedness, right? Instead of someone, right, becoming economically powerful or empowered, right, you find that the fellow is increasingly indebted, right, because of the digital financial inclusion. And that is very common because so many needs come up, right? And you keep on, right, maybe borrowing money, right? Or utilizing every money that you get, right? You spend it anyhow. Now, of course, there are other issues like now, digital inclusion, you're going to include only those ladies who are digitally literate. How about the digitally illiterate women? Right, they will be left out. Right. How about technological barriers? Not everyone has access to technology. Right. How about cultural constraints? The cultural constraints may actually limit empowerment outcomes because in certain areas, women are kept in a certain sort of state or situation. So all these are very, very important for us to think about, even when you're talking about your leadership, right? I heard you talk about leadership style, that is Tombe, right? If you're talking about, for example, there are different types of leadership styles, the transformational leadership, right? If you're relating it to project performance, right? But if you find information that leads to leadership fatigue, for example, your theory or conceptual framework will again fail, right? And that is okay, because that's what Popper is encouraging us to do, right? If you discover that employees now become more dependent on the leaders because sometimes they cannot even make decisions, right? And that's what we call leadership dependence. So that is an issue that is likely to come up. Just a second. So those are issues that are likely to come up. So I think a conceptual framework that can potentially fail is scientifically stronger, right? Because it permits critical testing and theoretical refinement, right? And of course, the other part of the question was what evidence would force you to revise your theory, right? And of course, the answer is very simple there, right? You should revise a theorem, right, when credible evidence, credible, and I mean credible evidence, right? Credible evidence, if credible evidence consistently contradicts its assumption. Remember, every framework, every theorem has assumptions, right? It has predictions, it has explanatory logic. So if you get evidence that challenge, right, the assumptions, and that's why when you come with a conceptual framework, please write down the assumptions you are making, right? Because at the end of the day, those assumptions will be tested, right? And of course, and when you are making assumptions, make credible assumptions, right? It's like now, people in economics will talk about the law of demand and the law of supply, right? And they will tell you, we assume other things being constant, right? But ideally, those things will not be constant. If you are competing in the market, for example, right, companies will continue to face regulatory issues, right? Institutions exist, right? You'll be talking about issues of rules, regulations, you'll be talking about norms, you'll be talking about all those perspectives, right? If you go by Scott or Max Weber, whatever it is, those institutional arrangements, right, will be there, right? Now, there are others, companies will be advertising, right? So you cannot underplay advertising unless, right, the companies are very few in the industry and the market is big, right? Then in such situations, people don't have to struggle and spend a lot of money on advertising, right? In those conditions. But so what we are saying here is that even when you are thinking about the assumptions that you're going to make, right? Think twice, right? And think reasonably, right? So let me just give you an example, right? And this is a real one, right? And I'm intending to develop something along these lines, right? In this country, we have so many laws, regulations, right? And the acts, right? That somehow tries to curtail this element that we call corruption. Right. So if, for example, you get a theory that claims that transparency reduces corruption, because you say now there is a leadership code, so register everything. There is this and the other, right? Now, I want to show you that the theory of yours, right, will require revision if evidence is repeatedly showing other things. Like one, you'll find that corruption is adapting to transparency systems, right? You and me know very well that, for example, we have the procurement, the PPD Act. First of all, the Act itself, then two, the body that regulates, right? PPDA, that institution exists, then plus a number of other things that are there, right? So if you know that that kind of thing exists, right? People usually discuss these deals and contracts, right, in drinking places, and then they go backwards and normalize, right, and have the documents produced. You know that very well. So corruption now has adapted to transparency systems, right? Now, corruption is also manipulating disclosure processes. Corruption also has issues of institutional enforcement, right? Just look and see what will happen to this lady that has been a center of discussion. I can assure you, nothing's likely to happen, right? And you know that very well, right? So, but if there are other issues coming up, like persistent corruption is coming up despite the transparency reforms that have come up. So in other words, in this case, you'll have this element, right, coming in. Your theory is failing, right, because it cannot deal with those issues. So that's why many times in qualitative research, right, there are those things that you are going to discover. And that's why some people, I think, advocate for mixing. You have the quantitative, the qualitative, right, and they mix these things so that these issues come up. But in a quantitative research, right, that becomes a different story altogether. But anyway, what you should note here whether it is quantitative or qualitative, yes. From a Popperian perspective, theories grow stronger, not because they avoid criticism, but because they remain open to correction. They remain open to refinement. They remain open to replacement when evidence exposes their limitations. And this is very, very important, and it is part of what Popper advocates for. So can someone help me and mute that mic? That seems to be misbehaving. Right, ladies and gentlemen. Right, Olivia Nakanoaji, please mute, right? Otherwise, your mic is disorganizing us. Let me deal with the issue of falsifiability, right? And then later on, again, give you time to respond or ask, right? Or share your experiences, ladies and gentlemen. So again, when you go through that book, right, you will discover that falsifiability is one of most Popper's influential methodological contribution, right? And that's why he says that a theory is scientific, not because it is proven true, but because it can potentially be shown to be false, right? And again, if I have colleagues here from the medicine, I sent here a book the other day that contained a theory, right, about diseases, right? And there was another book I sent you, which was actually talking about, they were dismissing, right, that particular theory, right? I categorically sent those two to you to see how you can develop your own theory, right, and believe that everything is fine. Only when these other fellows who are undertaking research elsewhere comes up to the conclusion that I think the theory is misleading, right, and they begin punching holes in your theory, right? But that should not really worry you very much, because after dismissing the theory, they must offer alternative explanations, right? And that theory will not be entirely wrong, although some theories, again, maybe at some stage I'll give you those particular theories that were found to be false, right, and should not be used, right? But they are there and they were developed, right? But there are those theories that still have an element of truth. So they are useful, only that they're not 100%, right? So as you can see, this is one of the most influential methodological contributions. And this principle, of course, transformed the scientific thinking, right? And that's why under positivism, again, if you listen to my lecture on positivism, right, repeated confirmation, right, somehow strengthens belief in truth, right? And that's the kind of thinking that people have. But Popper, unfortunately, in this case, disagrees with this kind of position. And he argues that no amount of confirming evidence can conclusively verify universal claims, right? And you remember the case of swans, that even if you get 100 people who have undertaken 100 researches and have proven that all swans are white, right? Then if evidence, there are 101 or 1,001, 1,000,001, right, brings in a swan that is not white and is black, then that theory, fails to stand. So that's why Popper says that no amount of confirming evidence can conclusively verify universal claims, right? Because one contradictory observation may actually refute those particular claims, right? You know the example of the swans, right? So the thousands of white swans do not conclusively prove the statement, but one black swan falsifies it, right? And that actually illustrates a symmetry between verification and falsification, and that is very important. Now, let me just give you another example that we could use, right? And I'm going to use a research methodology example, right? Since we've been having advanced research methods, let's imagine that during your development of the first chapter, you come up with a hypothesis, right? And the hypothesis that I mentioned earlier on about corruption, right? And your belief is that really, if we have transparency, right, corruption will reduce. And I think that's a thinking when these people came up with a leadership code. I'm not very sure, but if you are here and you participated in the development of those things, you can tell us. Just like now we have the sovereignty bill, right? So that means they had something in mind, right? And there was a theoretical basis upon which this was built, right? But I told you that you may get evidence to the contrary, right? Despite the transparency reforms, corruption is there. Despite transparency mechanism, and by the way, this transparency mechanism can be manipulated, right, by people who are in power. So that is very important for us to think about, right? So now we turn to this reflection that you, right, that you have there. Right. The other time we were talking about conceptual framework, right? And we brought in the assumptions. Now we are on hypothesis. So if you reflect on your hypothesis, especially if many of you have scientific, you have positivistic studies, what evidence could potentially falsify, right, your main hypothesis? Are your variables operationalized clearly enough to permit severe testing? Maybe before you respond to this, again, I want to remind you, right? And for me, the second bullet here, right, is not accidental, right? I want to tell you that in your studies, you never have so many objectives, because per each objective, you can have several hypotheses. You can imagine if you have 6 objectives, and for every objective, you have 5 hypotheses. That means you end up with 5 hypotheses times 6 objectives, and those will be 30 hypotheses. And that study will be quite huge. So for example, 3 objectives with the 5 hypotheses each objective, you have 15, right? And 15 is not also a small number, incidentally. So you need to think about the number of objectives and get guidance from your doctoral committee and the college where you are studying from. And that's why the bullet number 2 there says, are your variables operationalized clearly enough to permit severe testing? So don't leave any stone unturned. And our interest here is the depth, right? Not the breadth of the hypothesis. But anyway, let's leave that aside, because that was a discussion for last week and this week up to yesterday. Right, but what evidence, if you could reflect on your work, what evidence could potentially falsify your main hypothesis, right? And are your variables operationalized clear enough to permit severe testing? So please unmute and share with us. Again, we shall continue from there. Hello? Hey, am I talking to myself? I'm not very sure. Are you getting me? Are you hearing me that side?
Yes.
Yes, Professor.
Great. Can you talk to us?
Yes, I've got a question, Professor. Yes, you're talking about the hypothesis, and then you were talking about transparency and corruption. And you are saying if we have transparency, it is equal to non-corruption. What I was wondering, does the hypothesis have to be so direct, or can it be somehow vague? Like, for instance, transparency equals non-corruption only if the policies are followed and implemented correctly.
Again, Tombe, Tombe most likely didn't attend our lecture on hypothesis. I think it was Dr. Mataji that took us through that, right? There are rules for developing hypothesis, right? You don't simply wake up one morning and say this and the other, right? But there are so many other types of hypotheses. The directional hypothesis, non-directional hypothesis, right? You have the null hypothesis, the alternate hypothesis, and even last week, by the way, I talked about the null hypothesis and Karl Popper's conjectures and refutations, right? And why, right? We use null hypothesis most of the time. So I hope now, if you have read Karl Popper, you can actually defend your work if you're going to use null hypothesis. I know in the social sciences these days, there's a tendency to rely on the alternate hypothesis. They're the ones that they actually give. Right? Somebody will tell you increased transparency reduces corruption in public procurement, something like that. Or he will tell you that transparency and corruption are negatively correlated, something like that. So you find such hypothesis, but you need to be very careful the way you construct your hypothesis. But anyway, let's assume that you know what to do, right? And you come up with a hypothesis, right? The question is, what evidence could potentially falsify your main hypothesis, right? And I'm just assuming that you have a main hypothesis, right? So what evidence, again, I'm just calling you to start thinking about your research. You know, many times I have discovered that PhD students have fallen in love with their work. Me, I've supervised many, I've graduated many PhD students. In fact, over 50 have graduated. And there are many others I'm still supervising. But the student comes to you with the preconceived notions and ideas, and they have a fixed mindset. And sometimes when you try to correct them or to tell them to think harder, the fellow goes back and says, this man is bad. And again, when he meets other students who didn't want to read and also think about their work and critique, they say, we told you, right? If you are supervised by entire, you'll never finish, right? You'll be here forever and you can't get much out of because it's so demanding and yet the things are very easy, something like that. Right, but for me, I'm very happy actually. Most of my students, other than those who are problematic students with the family issues, work-related, and the rest of them, they all finish in the prescribed time, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. No student, I think, goes beyond 4 years. Unless, in fact, there's even some that finished in 2.5 years. All right, so me, I'm very proud because once you work very hard and you are ready to move and listen, after all, you are the driver, right? You are the driver. For me, I am just a passenger. You came with your own topics. I never gave you a topic. You came with your own objectives, hypothesis, etc. So you should drive your thing. My job is simple, to give you direction, right? If you are getting off the road, I put you back on the road. I say, no, this is the right path. Take this. Critique. And that's why now I'm asking you, what evidence could potentially falsify your main hypothesis? In fact, if you don't think about this, it will sooner or later come. It may not be me, but the opponent. If you don't pay attention to the things I'm telling you now, it's up to you. When you reach there, do not say that that my supervisors or doctoral committee members don't like me. In fact, there is no doctoral committee that hates you. No doctoral committee member, no supervisor. In fact, if you are able to progress very fast and finish very fast, that is their pride. That is their pride. A supervisor will be very proud that I have a student who has managed to do it this way. And in fact, if there is any presentation, right, that student that you are supervising should even be encouraged, right? Like today, I have a presentation somewhere in the afternoon at 6. There's a conference in London. It's my student who is going to make a presentation, right? We wrote the paper, right? And then we agreed on a few things here and there. Yesterday, I told him to make slides, send them to me. I looked at them. I told him that you prepare, you're going to present. It's not me who's going to present, right? So I think we need to get into that scenario, understanding that when you do very well, people will be proud of you. I can see Lilian Balunji putting up the hand. Maybe she's going to answer those two questions. Great. Over to you, Lilian. Lilian, I see your hand up. You have the floor. Hey.
Hear me now?
Yes, please. I think you have a network issue.
Am I being heard?
Well, we didn't hear anything, but you can start now. Unmute and speak. I think Lilian is having problems. Can someone help me? And okay, we can now go to
Yes,
HP.
Prof.
HP. Okay, who is speaking now?
Yes, Alfred.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to answer to the second question about the variables. So in my study, I would like to measure the livelihood resilience capacities. Under this concept, I have 3 dimensions. The first one is the transformative capacity. The second is the absorptive capacity. And the third is the adaptive capacity. And under each capacities, I have, many items I'm going to measure. So this is how I operationalize this construct and with the items I'm going to measure as variables. Thank you.
Is your study positivistic?
Yes, actually.
How are you going to capture adaptability?
Yes, the adaptive capacity actually is about the resources that people have at the household level, and also about their, how do you call it, the way they link with the others, and then the way they access also agricultural credit. There are also physical capitals like how do you call it, the number of cats they have at household level, and the storage facilities that they have. Yes, those are the adaptive capacities.
Alfred, just to cut you short because of the time constraint.
Yes.
I am aware that adaptability has been measured, right? If you look at the World Food Program resilience model, and also WHO and the other institutions, they do bring up this kind of element, right? But I can assure you, adaptability is a very interesting construct that you'd be able to interrogate if you use an interview guide rather than using a questionnaire. Because the assumption here is that someone has gone through some kind of stress. And the stress I'm talking about is not the human stress. In agriculture, there are so many climate shocks that come in there, right? And all these will affect the farmer in one way or the other. So somebody goes through that, and then you're looking at the adaptive capacity or mechanism. These are not necessarily resources at the household level, right? But how does somebody rebound back to the original state after going through that stressful condition or situation? So the quantitative tool may not be able to actually pick this information up. And so that's why I was actually asking as to whether you need a research question in this case, or probably you need a quantitative. Don't you think mixed method will help you so that whereas there you have that kind of statistic, but somehow you are able to explain using real life and lived experiences of the farmers that are going through this kind of thing. Anyway, it's up to you, but you avoided the first question, what evidence could potentially justify? Let's pick maybe from Lillian now and HP because I see their hands, but we'll begin with then from there we shall take a break for around 10 minutes.
Yes.
HP?
Can I be heard now?
Yes,
This
Lillian.
is Lillian Barunji.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor. You asked what evidence could potentially falsify my hypothesis. A brief background of what I am studying is accessibility to pre-hospital emergency medical services. And we know that there are things that have been put in place to make sure that people are able to access emergency care before they reach hospital. For example, the government has provided ambulances or is working on providing ambulances, at least an ambulance per constituency. But my study is about exploring the systemic approach of not just provision of ambulance that would lead us to having access to care, but other surrounding elements like probably availability of the providers, the systems in place to make sure that the ambulances are working well, on-scene care. And I want to explore the idea that once all these components work together, then they will contribute towards better accessibility to pre-hospital emergency care services. Now, to the question of what could potentially falsify the hypothesis is if all these systems now, all the elements, for example, if we have the care providers, the responders, the ambulances, what could then, and then it still fails for someone to receive timely care when they need it before they reach the hospital, then I will look at those factors that contributed to the system not working despite the issues being resolved. That's briefly what I can say I submit.
Right. And I think for me, you have an idea of where you're going. And I think those are the boundary conditions. Because if those things are there and still you cannot access, because you are talking about the accessibility to pre-emergency hospital services. And your assumption is that it's because of the systemic issues, right, that undermine and also availability of the. So suppose those things are there and still, so that means your hypothesis will be potentially falsified, right? Then you begin thinking about the boundary conditions. To me, I think that is very good, right? But even then, still continue interrogating and thinking about this issue, because even you call them ambulances being offered by government, these things may not be there. The way I know the Ugandan government, I am not very sure whether these things will be there. If they are there, then there will be a gatekeeper at some stage who will make life very hard, such that the ordinary citizens do not access the services. But anyway, at least you've got a very nice study. And for me, I'm actually interested in what you are doing, right? HP, our HP, we go to our HP.
Yes, my study, looking at poor sales performance of women agripreneurs and interrogating it using financial trust theory of financial inclusion by Oslo of 2020. But in it, I have, though they talk about different hypotheses using mediation, my mine is a moderated mediation. I made an extension in my framework where I have a mediator as a financial retracee. I have an independent variable financial inclusion. Then the problem is the sales volume. Then in between there, I anchored in the
HP. Don't take us into variables. Dependent is this, independent of this.
Okay, Prof.
Of this. What I want to hear from you is your central argument, because every PhD research, remember, this is a thesis. A thesis.
Yes,
a thesis is an argument. An argument. There's an argument you are putting forward, and that argument has a main hypothesis. So you give us your main hypothesis, right, and then answer the question.
Okay, Prof. The main argument where I feel it will be falsified is I brought in the issue of the business culture variations of these women who are running agripreneurs, and I feel in there that variation there that I'm trying to interrogate within my study.
Can you first give us your main thesis? What is your thesis? Because I'm actually getting lost. I'm getting lost. Whereas the other lady I could easily pick, even when it is not in my field. For you who is very close to my field, I'm failing to understand you. Right. So what is your main thesis?
My main thesis is about financial inclusion and sales performance of women agripreneurs.
Sales what?
Sales performance of women agripreneurs.
So where are you contributing knowledge?
I'm contributing knowledge by interrogating
No. Which field? Where are you contributing knowledge?
It's finance.
It can't be. When you are dealing with sales performance, that is marketing. And it is on what we call sales. Yeah? That's sales performance. In other words, you must know the models in marketing, the theories in marketing on sales. Right. And for you, the other issue of performance, I don't know, because you are talking about entrepreneurs, sales performance, then you have something else, this other side. These are just explanations of sales performance. Maybe I got you wrong.
Prof, maybe I'm trying to, I look at that line item, the first line item that we prepare in your statement of financial position, that is the sales itself. That is it's a 15.
You know, I don't know your name. That's why I'm calling you HP. I don't know your name. I would have like now for my friend Richard, I can say Richard Dung because I can identify him on here. But for you, I identify with your what? Your gadget HP. HP, answer my question. Okay, what is your topic?
My topic is financial inclusion, financial literacy, and sales performance of women agripreneurs in Central Region.
So you have 3 variables: financial inclusion. Is that fine?
Yes.
The second variable is what?
Financial literacy.
Financial literacy. And the third one?
And the third variable is sales performance of women agripreneurs.
Yes. So believe me, your work is in marketing, although you are including financial inclusion. You know, you are contributing to the sales literature. Sales literature. Right. And you are contributing to the sales literature by introducing literacy, financial literacy, and inclusion. So, and you are saying that inclusion alone is not sufficient unless these fellows are financially literate.
And also, Prof, I have a modulator there because I'm using. I have a modulator there because I'm using a moderated mediation framework. It's a business culture that are in there.
For me, I will ask you to interface. Just look for time and talk to your supervisors or doctoral committee, so that the first thing you should get is to know what your thesis is, what is your central argument. As long as you are still at the point of talking about variables, I have a variable A, variable B, variable C, I have a moderator, I have a mediator, moderated mediator, etc. You haven't got there yet. You don't have an argument. It means that you haven't read your literature very well. You have not identified the research gap. You don't know the field where you're contributing knowledge, and you are not even aware of the theories that actually explain your criterion variable. The criterion variable sets the pace, right? And the other thing you try to do is to explain. It's like somebody telling you that people on one village X are dying. Death then becomes an issue, which you must investigate. Right. If death is an issue, then you start looking for possible explanations. Where are these deaths occurring? So you don't begin now with the possible explanations and dealing with them when you don't even know what is happening there. So in your area, you don't begin with the financial inclusion. If you want to make financial inclusion the main criterion variable and your argument centers on that, then make it financial inclusion of women entrepreneurs. And your argument will then shift. You tell us that women are financially excluded. And that's the issue that you want to deal with. And then look for the possible explanations of financial inclusion. Right. Otherwise, now you shift between the variables. You don't know where the problem should be, whether it's in the moderator, moderated mediation, wherever you have a problem. Right. And for me, I'm just advising you, right? I'm not your supervisor, but I'm advising you to go and seek an audience, right? And a discussion. But first, get the argument right. First of all, what is the problem? For me, from the way you're explaining, the problem is sales performance. But if you change it, please change it and look for possible explanations. Then you go to your supervisor if you want to change it. But don't shift between the variables. You'll have a problem, right? But for someone who is doing an experiment, the issues may change slightly because it's going to introduce an intervention to see whether there are changes in those particular things. But even then, the problem does not shift, right? Although the emphasis is in the intervention. Right. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to give you a break. Right. Let me stop share here. I know Dungu wants to come in. Dungu, can we agree that you'll be the first person to come in after the break, so that we are breaking off at 9:31 and we are coming back at 9:41, 10 minutes. Is that okay, Dungu?
It's fine, Professor.
Okay, so let's break.
Hello. 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 Hello, members. Good morning, everyone on call. Hello.
Morning. Morning.
It seems the professor's network went off.
No, we're on a break.
Hey, we are in a break.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine.
All right, welcome back from your break. I hope you enjoyed.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, there are two people who wanted to make a presentation. The other one, I think, lowered the hand. That was who? We can start with him and then we go to Paul.
Dung Richard, Professor. Yeah, Professor, my topic is on selective breeding for growth and thermal tolerance among Nile tilapia populations of Uganda. And my key hypothesis here is that I'm trying to make is that I can simultaneously select for both growth and thermal tolerance traits among the Nile tilapia populations of Uganda. But the critical falsifications that I think I will encounter is if I find that thermal tolerance especially is not heritable. I find that the heritability or the variation among these populations is very low for heritability, which is a characteristic for these life traits which are highly conserved, and then I will not be able to select for both growth and thermal tolerance among the Nile tilapia populations to be able to enable me to produce a strain which can grow well but also be tolerant to high temperatures. I submit, Professor.
That's quite interesting, but you've only given us one. How I wish maybe during your free time you reflect on a number of others that you have to think about, right? But that is very good if you want to look at selective breeding for growth, right, and tolerance. And you have your thesis, and then of course you also anticipate, right, certain things that may not give you what you want, right, and those are aspects that will actually falsify your main hypothesis. Okay, for me that is very good. Can we take two others? We have Paul Muhenga.
Thank you, Professor. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I'm looking at digital transformation and sustainable governance in Uganda's oil sector.
What did you say?
Specifically,
Digital transformation and
looking
what?
at the Tilenga project.
Digital
My central argument, digital transformation,
yes.
sustainable governance in Uganda's oil sector, specifically looking at the Tilenga project. My central argument, I have in mind that as Uganda launches to become an oil producer, there is a need in achieving lasting societal value by mitigating social, environmental, and economic risks. This is achieved through digital transformation roadmap under the Digital Uganda Vision Framework to achieve integration of technology, transparency, human rights protection, and environmental accountability into the core of commercial oil production.
Hey, you have said so many things. Don't you think you have lost me in the process? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Prof. Yes, Prof.
Yes.
My central, yes, please.
Yes, I wanted to, well, you've lost me because you said so many things and I didn't pick exactly, but you can reframe, eh? Without necessarily repeating the topic because I got the topic. So you are talking about digital transformation, so you don't have to repeat, but proceed.
Yes, I'm saying as Uganda becomes an oil producer, there is need to ensure lasting societal value by mitigating social, environmental, and economic risks. This should be achieved through digital transformation roadmap under the Digital Uganda Vision Framework to achieve integration of technology, transparency, human rights protection, and environmental accountability into the core of oil production in Uganda.
Okay. I have a few concerns, right?
Yes, please.
Remember, the issue that we are discussing here is what evidence could potentially falsify. But from the way you are presenting, I don't seem to pick the answers.
Please, Prof, can you flash back the PPT?
Maybe I missed that out.
Okay, you are. Okay, fine. Someone is reminding me that maybe it's because. Let me see. Where is the share button now? I have difficulties identifying the share button. Okay, share is here. This is right. The share button is there, right? So that is the question. Let me just highlight this. That is the question. Are you seeing the question?
What evidence could potentially falsify your main hypothesis? In spite the positive attributes in oil production, the benefits that come to it, there are also attributes that may affect people's livelihoods. Their livelihoods, people losing their land, people becoming poorer. I don't know if I'm answering the question. I logged in late.
Okay, so I think you need to look at the hypothesis, your main hypothesis, right? Because we are dealing with digital transformation and, sustainable governance, right? So the assumption here is that digital transformation somehow influences sustainable governance within those particular fields. Right, but I'm just trying to think aloud, right? Supposing you find that digital systems exist, right? But the biggest problem you have is weak accountability. Supposing you also discover that the governance platforms exist. I know that I mean you are very familiar with the government, what you call the e-governance systems, right? You go to procurement, you have the e-procurement. You go to it, you have all these e-government systems. So the platforms actually exist, but somehow they are bypassed through some more informal political networks and patronage systems. So you discover that your system will not actually work. Right. Then you discover that you have monitoring systems, maybe e-governance monitoring systems, but environmental degradation still continues. Right. So to me, I think that's where you should look at, generally speaking. Right. What are those things that could potentially falsify your main hypothesis? Your main hypothesis, okay, you've reviewed the literature, and you know that digital transformation will actually lead to sustainable governance in Uganda's oil sector. But there are certain things that may actually falsify this main hypothesis, right? Like the ones I've just mentioned. So can you think about it?
In your explanation, you are giving me the answer. I feel that something like institutional capacities to make people understand and appreciate those systems and they use them.
Okay, that's fine. But think about them, right? Those things are very important. I don't know whether there's anyone else who would like to contribute before we continue with our lecture. Any other person who wants to contribute? Let me see, there is a comment here. As thank you, inside, is it possible to have grounded in a framework as opposed to a theory? I think we answered this last week. Again, what guides the choice between grounding a study? I mean, it's like a farmer. I think I gave an example of a farmer who has his toolbox, right? And he wants to go and harvest maize, right? He looks at the toolbox first. What am I going to use, right? Are you going to use, for example, a slasher to harvest maize? Are you going to use a panga? Are you going to use a hoe? So the choice is there, right? It depends on what you want to do and the tools that are available. And it's very hard unless you know the frameworks that exist in literature and the theories. You never choose the right one because, first of all, you don't know what exists. So how can you choose what you don't know? It becomes a little bit hard. So that's why I told you that you begin by familiarizing yourself with the theories in your area where you want to contribute knowledge so that you can choose one. Okay, so I think all those are very insightful. And for me, I am not in a rush, right, to discuss all these things and finish them, right? I can actually share a few other slides, maybe 3 or 4 or 5, and then we close the session. And since we have another discussion tomorrow, then we can actually begin from there, right? So we shall move straight to our next, slide. You know, my machine here, let me see, I hope not. Right, so I wanted us to look at Einstein, and I hope many of us are very familiar with Einstein's work. And I specifically used these ones because I know the arguments we've been having here are from sciences. Like the scientists have been, and you know the reason why they advance those things and we believe them is because we are ignorant, right? Because we are ignorant, they can always feed us on anything that may not even make sense, and somehow we accept, right? So, but when you are educated, right, and you have read widely, right, no amount of confusion will compel you to believe what people are saying. So that's why now we need to look at Einstein, right, and pseudoscience. And actually, Karl Popper talks about this, right? So I think you can see that, as I said earlier on, Einstein, right? Sorry, not Einstein, but Popper Popper actually regarded Einstein, right, as an ideal scientific thinker, right? He actually looked at Einstein as one of those fellows that have advanced in science, right? Because he's a good, right, philosopher and also scientific person in terms of thinking about knowledge that exists, right? And that's why Karl Popper believes that when Einstein, right, developed his own ideas and arguments, right, Einstein's theories, actually like the theory of relativity and a few others, the theories exposed themselves to empirical risk, right? They're actually testable. So that's why now Einstein's theory of relativity, right, actually made precise predictions concerning a number of things like, for example, light, space, time and gravity, right? And again, when Einstein was developing his theory based on these perspectives, he acknowledged that if observations contradicted these predictions or his predictions that he had come up with, the theory would fail. And in fact, Einstein is very emphatic on that. He says, yes, this is it, the theory of relativity. However, right, if we get contrary evidence, then the theory will fail, right? Which was not made by Newton, right? And that's why you refer to Newton's predictions as actually laws, right? You talk about Newton's laws of motion, Newton's this and the other, and things like that, and you've made them laws, right? But we see that they have worked, and they work and they are being applied, but in certain areas, they are limited. So Einstein said, yes, this is it, but if something comes up and somehow falsify what I've come up with, then, and he acknowledged it. So this willingness to risk refutation, right, impressed Popper deeply. When Popper looked at the works of Einstein, and Einstein had made these, he was actually very much impressed, right? But again, he goes ahead and says, but pseudoscientific systems, right, they survive by reinterpretation, right? And even at some stage, they say, but there's this element of conceptual flexibility, right? In this setting, this concept means this. The other setting, we can change it a little bit, right? So they keep on protecting those theories, right? And the laws, right, from criticism, right? So we could also take another example, right? Freud. If Freud is going to interpret aggression, right, for those who are in psychology, right, or even silence or resistance, right, and somehow he interprets them as evidence supporting psychoanalytic assumptions, right, then of course such interpretive flexibility will reduce falsifiability, meaning that you will not easily falsify Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic assumptions, right? So I think these are very important, and we must think about them, right? And come up with the aspects, right, that are very important. So I have 3 questions, right, that I want you to think about, right? Of course, knowing that according to Karl Popper, scientific rigor will require empirical risk and rigorous testing. Right, so the question we are asking is, why is intellectual risk, right, essential for science? And why do some theories avoid criticism? Because those theories are there. They avoid because they have inserted the caveats around them that you cannot easily falsify them, right? And that's why Karl Popper calls them pseudoscience and not real science, right? Then the other question we are asking ourselves is, can qualitative theories also expose themselves to challenge? Right, again, I want a discussion on this, then I'll sum up and then move towards closing the session. Right? Let me see if I have questions in the chat room. Right, for the, is it possible to have a PhD study grounded in framework? Okay, this one I've already answered. Okay, the evidence of what you okay. Okay, I think there are no more questions. Just unmute and speak. Don't worry. Israel, you haven't said anything. Esmat Cody, Alfred Kinyera, Chris Munyonzwe. Hey, what's happening? People are very quiet. I am getting.
Yes, good morning.
Please
Good
go
morning,
ahead.
Professor.
Good morning.
Yes, I would just like to comment on the first question. Why is intellectual risk essential for science? Although I'm not a scientist, but I would just like to comment on it because, you know, most of the risk, most of the development in the human history, it actually came from risk. Like going to space. You know, some people are they're interested in the ventures which will take them beyond what they've experienced so far. So, like in business, for me, I'm from a business background. Risk is associated with a lot of income, the return on investment. So when you take the risk, you tend to gain more from it, from a business background. But risk, usually it is beneficial in the long run because it is like a catalyst which takes you to another level. This is my comment anyway. Thank you.
Okay, you are relating it to what? To benefit, yeah?
Yes, to development, human development.
Okay.
You know,
but I want you to I want you also think about it this way, right? You want to go to America, right? Maybe New York. You board a plane at Entebbe. The assumption is that the plane is perfect, right? And that you reach your destination. Not so? So you never think about risks. But there are also risks.
But those are they are calculated risks, of course. You calculate the risk, and you make sure that, of course, the plane that you enter is not damaged beyond repair. So in business, we tend to calculate the risks. You know, it is not like.
But Tom,
it's not like.
Tom,
yes.
Those are assumptions you make at the airport. Do all planes leave their destination? Do they reach their destinations?
Yes, traveling by plane is the safe. No, traveling by plane is the safest mode of travel, by the way. So when I enter a plane,
I agree, Tombe. I'm not really disagreeing, and that's why we all take the plane. Even you enter the car, right, and you drive every day. You assume there are certain assumptions, but the question is: remember the issue of the white swans, right?
Yes, I read part of that. Yes.
Yes, but you know, you'll find a black swan out of the 1,000 swans, and that will falsify it. So even your assumptions, right, of assuming that all risks have been calculated and taken care of, do actually fail. The point, you've discovered that one plane has failed to reach the destination. You know that very well, and not all of planes actually reach their destinations.
But that does not mean I will not take a plane. I will continue taking planes.
That's
why we will continue taking risks.
Tombe, you are forgetting the academic argument we are advancing here. Science and pseudoscience, and the plane is just an example, right? Just like you have a million swans which are white, one of them will falsify the theory. And I can assure you, even that theory of reaching, that is the safest, the safest reaching the destination, the moment you get one plane crashing, that will again expose that theory to a problem, right? But according to Popper, that is true science. But for you, the moment you do not want your issue to be opened up and discussed and dismissed, then that's another area of having a fixed mindset, right? That it is always A and it is A, right? But things change, my friend. But let's go back.
Thank you, Professor.
Let's go back, right, to the issue. Why is intellectual risk essential for science? Because for you now, you are telling us intellectual risk is not essential. I mean, using the examples and the arguments, the counter arguments you are giving, you are telling us that intellectual risk is not essential for science.
No. I said it is essential, actually.
Okay.
Risk is essential.
But the defense proves the otherwise. Right. Let's have other Mugoya Daniel.
Thank you so much, Prof. I want to answer point two where you talk about why do some theories avoid criticism, and I want to bring it up from the very point that you mentioned. I think the theories, many theories avoid criticism because of the million white swans. So the argument is how do we then explain the million swans which have existed over the million white swans which have existed over the years, and now we are trying to say that this black swan is the one which is now falsifying everything that has been done. I think at that point, then the theories are always protected so much because over the period they have explained. And it was one of the things which happened. I was listening to an interview by Elon Musk, who is trying to commercialize the going to the Mars and the Moon. And the previous people who have been in the same research are saying this is critically impossible. And at that point, it becomes very hard because Elon Musk was saying these are his mentors. If they're saying it is impossible, it's a shame to research. So at that point, that's where someone finds themselves that they are finding themselves to protect a million white swans over the new black one, which has just existed.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's a good contribution, right? We need to have our minds open to critiques and the criticism, and I like the examples you are using. Can we pick two more, and then I give you a closing statement on these three, and then we call it a day. Right? Any other? Just unmute and speak to us.
Yes, Prof.
This is supposed to be interactive. Eh? Alfred.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to give my view on the second bullet. Why do some theories avoid criticisms? Yeah, there are some thoughts that are related to maybe religious matters, something like that. And they don't want people to criticize it. And it is rooted to the, how do you call it, to the cultural values and to the belief systems. Yeah, it's what I would like to share. Thank you.
Okay, can we take one more? One more.
Professor, in the comment section, if you could read, there's a question from Kimanga Michael. I'm wondering how religious scholars make it, since the Bible is authoritative and not debatable.
Okay. Okay. Then there is someone who has another reproduction issue, sexual intercourse between a woman and a man. Right. There are many other comments there, right? But I'll not go into the discussion of religion. You know, the moment you start discussing issues of religion, right, you lose the entire argument, right? Because people are emotionally attached. Let me answer these ones generally speaking. I think as we close. Oh, Kinyera, maybe Alfred first comes in there, and then we close, right? We shall see whether it's necessary for us to engage into the religious debates, like the one that you've just put on in the chat room. Alfred, please go ahead. Pinera.
Yes, Professor, thank you, and good morning, colleagues. I want to respond to the question why intellectual risk is essential for science. I think intellectual risk is essential because in science it would allow validation. Because if we all remember the story of bulb development, it underwent a lot of tests and validation until the final test where eventually a bulb was produced. So unless the developer of this bulb undertook to validate the experiment and design of the various bulbs he had developed that failed the test, he wouldn't have eventually come up with a functional bulb. And all these involve accepting that risk is there, and then needed to validate every bulb that was developed. I think that is why riskiness, intellectual risk becomes important in science. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I liked your aspect of validity, validation, right? No, I saw someone who had put up his hand. Do not give up, right? You can still contribute before I close. I like the validity issue. To me, that takes me to what I call rigorous testing. So intellectual risk encourages rigorous testing, right? And the critical scrutiny. To me, that's what I pick from your answer, and that is very good. Yes, someone has just put down his hand or her hand. Can you talk to us? Even if you have changed your mind, at least you can greet us. Okay. I think someone will have.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Prof?
Yes, Thaddeus, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and a very good morning to everyone. So when I was looking at that first question, why is intellectual risk essential for science? I'm also thinking about intellectual property rights. I'm not too sure if it will apply here. So if it does, like there's always a risk that some two people might be working on a similar subject, but when it comes to intellectual property rights, so it means somebody has to be very thorough in what they do and make sure that the work remains original work. They don't steal from other people's work. Like that's where the intellectual property rights come in, and to make sure that it's original work. That's what I was thinking when I was looking at that question from the perspective of intellectual property rights. Thank you, Professor, and thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Now you bring in the issue of intellectual property, right? And
Yes.
intellectual risk. That reminds me this fellow who was working on a theory of evolution. I've forgotten his name, a scientist here, evolutionary biologist can remind me, right? He's not the only person who was working on the theory of evolution. There was another person, right? But only that this fellow was the first to publish, right? And the work was widely cited. So the other fellow did not even receive any recognition. The one actually who had advanced so much in that particular area. So that's why you keep on referring to the same person. But anyway, let me just give a sum up, right, of these three questions and the answers that you provided, right? Certainly, as someone did indicate, intellectual risk is essential for science because progress occurs when theories expose themselves to possible failure, possible criticism and contradiction, again, consistent with Karl Popper. And Karl Popper is very, very clear. He says a theory that risks being proven wrong is scientifically stronger than one that explains everything regardless of evidence, right? So intellectual risk in this case encourages rigorous testing, just like our friend told us. It encourages innovation. It encourages theoretical refinements and critical scrutiny, right? We saw a very good example of Einstein, and I will not go back to Einstein because I have already told you what he said, right? You know how he made risky predictions concerning gravity and light. And of course that could have been proven to be wrong, right? Through observation. But that theory exposed itself to possible refutation, and therefore it was scientifically powerful using the lens of Karl Popper, right? So in doctoral research, we need also to be flexible, right? Not to defend things anyhow, right? Then the second bullet we have here, why do some theories avoid criticism, right? A very good example I can give is Tombe's arguments, right? And this is where we are. Most of us, by the way, none of us like to be critiqued, right? So some theories avoid criticism because, one, scholars become emotionally attached to them. And emotional attachment is terrible. And I think I emphasized that point at Makerere when we are having our discussion on theories. How do I use theories in a PhD work? Right. Do not get emotionally attached to them. And I used a very good example of Einstein, right? And Newton. And I know the Newtonian people who are attached, they are emotionally attached to Newton, they will not buy the idea of Einstein. They will say, no, this is the best, and therefore we are now making it a law, right? And it becomes a universal law. The fellows who are emotionally attached to Einstein, luckily enough, Einstein does not force people to believe in him 100%. He says, however, if you continue doing research and you discover contradictory evidence, this theory of relativity will fail. And he states it himself. Right now, there are very few people who are very bold, right, who will make those statements. And that's why Karl Popper actually thanks, right, this gentleman and calls him a true scientist, as opposed to others who are pseudoscientists, because they will defend anything that does not work at all. And they will keep on even flexing concepts. They will say, no, but he meant this. You did not understand him. You did not do this and the other, things like that. And yet theories are developed in a certain context, and we are supposed to have, right, we're supposed to understand those particular constructs. So they avoid this criticism because of that emotional attachment. Two, there's also an element of institutions protecting dominant paradigms. And this happens very much. You move from one university to another. In one university, they do not believe that you can touch certain paradigms because they are dominant. And yet these are supposed to be interrogated, by the way. Right. We are supposed to expose error. Right. A university is a place where you have a clash of ideas. Can someone help us mute that mic that's misbehaving? Yeah, we're supposed to have a clash of ideas, right? My idea should not be dominant, right? And take yours as right, meaningless. No, you also have views, right? So we critique each other, right? And then see how we can actually improve science. So institutions are also fond of protecting dominant paradigms, just like individuals become emotionally attached to those particular things. Then, of course, some theories, they become politically or what I call ideologically powerful. So there are political issues and ideological issues behind this, right? And then, of course, in some other areas, some researchers fear what they call reputational damage. That if I challenge this and the other, and then later it is discovered that I made mistakes here and there will be reputational damage, right? But there are no reputational damages in this kind of thing, right? We are all contributing. And if you can come up with something that is later, right, tested rigorously, right, and someone is able to add something, that you are doing a very good thing then. So there are no reputational damages and academic conflicts, right, when you go there. So sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, theories avoid criticism by becoming too vague or even flexible, so that every possible outcome appears to confirm them, right? And that's why people come up with all sorts of explanations. So anyway, that's where we are. And I gave you an example, right? So that's why in academia, right, we have publication gatekeeping, right? You write a paper, you send it, then reviewers must review, right? There's a theory that we've been interrogating recently with my PhD students, right? And we wrote a paper and we sent it for review. And our feeling is that this theory, right, does not hold true, right? So we interrogated it and we sent it to SAGE, right? One of the journals in SAGE. I forget the name of the journal because I asked the student to send it there, right? So the reviewers review. Luckily enough, they did not reject the paper. They accepted the paper, right? But they gave us major revisions. So we responded to the major revisions, right, that they gave us, right? And some of the issues, we actually dismissed them, right? And then we reconstructed our arguments. For us, the comments were very good because they helped us shape our argument further. So we sent it, right? We sent the paper. And then they reviewed again and they sent it back, right? Now with the minor corrections, and the corrections were around now the modeling of our interpretation, right? And yesterday, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, on Thursday, we spent some good time early in the morning discussing with my student on how we could. So we addressed, and I believe we are still waiting for more comments or probably acceptance. So because these are now minor issues. So that's why I'm saying that in academia, again, you have publication gatekeeping, you have reviewers, there are disciplinary traditions. There are also issues of supervisor dominance that also discourage criticism of influential theories or senior scholars. So Popper again warns that theories protected from criticism, they actually risk becoming dogmatic and scientifically weak. And that is where the person who asked the question about religion, right? That's where religion also stands. Some of the things have become dogmatic. And you've been told by faith, we believe these things. You cannot reopen, right, the discussion on these particular aspects. In fact, if you reopen, you will be taken to be heretic, right? And if I'm not mistaken, some religions will, well, what is the word they use, right? They will get rid of you, right? Because they believe that you become antichrist, right? On anti-religion, right? And in other religion, they will announce a fatwa against you, right? And of course, you know what that means. So those are issues that are very critical, but in the theories, at least we are allowed to interrogate, right? And we have dismissed a theory and we have reconstructed the theory, right? And if SAGE one of the very powerful publishing houses, right? And again, the journal being also powerful, right? Class A journal. If they can accept those arguments, then I think we are doing a great job in that perspective. So now moving to the third question, can qualitative theories also expose themselves to challenge? And the answer is yes, because we know that qualitative research does not always test hypotheses statistically, right? But at the end of the day, qualitative theories can and should expose themselves to challenge through, for example, contradictory narratives. And these are there. You pick them because you are getting the lived experiences. Of course, depending on the strand that you are taking, whether you are dealing with phenomenology, right? Of course, using your reflexivity. I mean, you are able to bring up these contradictory narratives. And then also alternative explanations, right, will be sought, right? And contextual comparison, reflexivity, as I've already said, and critical scrutiny of assumptions. And this is very important. Let me just give you an example. If you're studying women's empowerment, and that's the example I gave you earlier on, right? Women's empowerment through microfinance. Now, of course, initially when you're undertaking this study, you expect positive outcomes. But strong qualitative inquiry, right, will also examine other issues that will come in. Social conflict, for example, exclusion, increased domestic tension, right? Because even if you are empowered, right, through microfinance, but you have a husband, and in some cultures, these men are very, very powerful. Right, in one of the studies that we carried out with my colleagues, right, in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and some other countries in West Africa, right, we discovered a number of things, right, that come in there, right. Increased domestic tension, for example, right, the debt burdens, the social conflict, exclusion, right. So these are very, very important aspects for us to think about. So qualitative theories become stronger when researchers acknowledge complexity, and you should be actually, by the time you complete your PhD, I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, right, that you will be better citizens, right? And I mean academic citizens and also citizens of the countries where you are and also citizens of this universe, right? Because pride will go. Right now, most of us are very proud about what we know, what we learned at the undergraduate and masters, and we think that we are there, right? But when you allow people to interrogate your ideas, you discover that you know nothing. Every day is a learning point, right? Pride will go, right? And then you become responsible citizens. So acknowledge issues of complexity in all matters. Right. Acknowledge having new questions coming up, right, and coming up with the interpretations every now and then. And of course, remain, right, open to revising explanations. Do not be rigid. And from a Popperian perspective, ladies and gentlemen, qualitative scholarship, right, weakens when interpretations become unquestionable. Right. When you come up with when you come up with a narrative, and that narrative becomes unquestionable, and it is protected from criticism, then you know you are going nowhere. Right. And that's why it is very important when we start questioning, right, everything that is around us. So at the end of the day, right, we need to think, right, about these perspectives, and then see how we can improve ourselves and improve the communities where we are. And that's why a PhD must solve practical problems. That is one, right? You are solving a practical problem in your community, in your society, in your area of diseases. If you are dealing with a disease or pests, right? Pest control or parasites, the parasite development, wherever you are, right? You're supposed to solve a practical problem. At the same time, you are supposed to contribute to knowledge. Right. So we expect you to shed off your pride and then become responsible citizens. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me, right, to stop here. And And if there is one final question that you'd like to ask, you ask, right? Or probably we call it a day, and we meet tomorrow, right? Where we shall spend around 1 hour or 1.5 hours again, the series of conjectures and refutations by Karl Popper. And to me, this is a book that all of you must read. I'm just giving you ideas, but the book is detailed. I'm just giving you general ideas. The other book that I asked you to read, I hope you still remember it, right? These are a class, right? Kuhn, right? Kuhn. You need to read Kuhn, right? The scientific revolution, right? And that is very important because you'll be able to learn how paradigms have evolved over time, right? And why it is important for you to know so that, I mean, you are not fed on dogmas, right? Where someone will tell you, you know, in the, let me just give you a very simple example again, which is very controversial. Somebody will tell you there are three, right, personalities in one God, right? And you cannot reopen that interpretation. Then they will tell you there is a God the Father, there is a God the Son, then the God the Holy Spirit, right? And they are all co-equal, right? And so you can't reopen that and discuss it, right? But when you go to Islam, they will tell you there is one true God, right? Cannot be equated to other gods. So you cannot say the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit are also within that. Right, but for them, they have their own philosophy, which dismisses this one. But at the end of the day, you say, no, let us now form an ecumenism so that you don't reopen this one and discuss it. But we are all one. We are brothers and sisters, as long as we can sit in the same place. For you, worship what you want to worship, but as long as we don't quarrel, right? Then Paul meets another group of people who are talking about a known God, right? And then the unknown God. And he says, but this is the God I'm bringing to you, and there are no other gods. There's only one true God. And then you say, but you see, even those who believe in the three gods being co-equal, they read the same book, but they have never seen that one. And if they see it, they say, but you know, these ones are also minor books that are in the same book, right? So the fellows were very selective. So, but you can also reopen those things and discuss them. So the one who was asking about religion, please reopen and discuss, but join them where they are so that you contribute to the debate of God in their disciplines. For us here, we are discussing other things that are not religious in nature. Right. Anybody with a question or point? Don't take me in the religious direction when you're asking a question. Right. Anyone? Thaddeus? All right. Vianney Mutiaba?
Hi, Prof. Sorry, I do not have any questions at this moment.
Fantastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a pleasure, right, for me to meet you today and have a discussion on those few ideas. The ideas are not my ideas, and I'm not strongly attached to those things. I have a mindset that is a growth in nature. It changes depending on the new information that I pick, right? I don't have a fixed mindset. So I hope you enjoy your weekend and let us meet tomorrow at 4 or 5. I can't remember the time very well, but I sent it to you, and let us meet around that time. And again, debate for around 1 or 1.5 hours. Again, reflect on your work so that when we come here, we are able to discuss from an informed point of view other than presenting abstract ideas. I wish you a nice day. Enjoy your day. I'll be sending you a recording after this. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.